What's up, guys? Cwesolo here, and today we are going to be continuing where we left off on our tutorial series on how to code in C#. Last time I left you guys off with a little challenge to simulate a conversation between a computer and a user. So I hope you guys did well on doing that. I hope that you guys used the things that we learned in the last video to make your own conversation. I'm going to kind of show you what a basic conversation would maybe be like. So we'll keep this part here. So we're going to just keep input and we'll just simulate a conversation. So let's do that. So we're going to do const.writeLine. We're going to reply with that's great. What did you do today? And then we're going to go ahead and reuse input here. We use input equals console. So we're reusing input here to get more data. We're going to refill it again. And we are going to continue writing our nice little conversation here between a computer and a user, and that's really cool. There we go. There's our conversation. Let's save her up and let's go ahead and run this. So, my name is computer. How are you today? I am great. That's great. What did you do today? I learned how to code in C#. That's really cool. And there is our simulated conversation between a person and a computer. There we go. If you didn't exactly get the same kind of thing I had here, that is 100% fine. As long as it works, that's really all that matters. I didn't really mention this in the last video, but you can reuse variable types to change what is in them. So I use the same input string, the string input here, and I use the same string twice to display different things on the screen and putting new things into input. I should have mentioned that one, saying you can manipulate variables, but today's video is actually going to be entirely about variables and data types. So let's get into it. So I'm going to go over the basic variable types that we have, ones that you'll be using most of the time. So we're going to be going over them. So we're going to start off with bool and or Boolean. Well, it's just bool. It's a Boolean. And we're gonna name it. We're gonna name it Boolean. And this is a true. It's a true or false thing. So it'll check if it is true or false. It can be one of two things. That's it. It's either yes or no, true or false. That's it. That's all there is. It is just a true or false statement. And this can be used in a variety of ways. If you're like, for example, checking if, for example, let's say you're making a calculator and you're dividing something, right? And you don't want to divide by 0. Okay, you cannot divide by 0, 0 divided by 0, 1 divided by 0. You just simply cannot divide by 0, right? And you want to check whether there is a 0 that was inputted in the user input, right? And if it's there, you can prevent against that by checking whether or not there is a 0 that was there. Checking that if the input was 0. So if the input was 0, you would set the Boolean to true, and then it would simply say, instead of trying to calculate it, it would just say, you cannot divide by 0. This is undefined, right? And that's an example that you could use a Boolean for. The next thing we're going to go over is another type that you'll be using probably a lot, is an int. So an int is a number, any whole number, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 15, and it can realistically go anywhere up to I think like 2 billion. So an int can only hold about 2 billion, the number 2 billion. It's somewhere around there. I think the total, it's like 2,147,000,000, something along those lines. We can look it up real quick to get the exact value. What is the highest number an int can hold? Yeah, 2,147,483,647. This is the maximum, this is the biggest number that an integer can hold. And it can also go negative also, so it can hold negative whole numbers too. There is a thing called an unsigned int, where it can hold just a positive value. We're not going to go into that, because it isn't something that we're really worried about at this point. So yeah, this is the highest value that an integer can hold in positive, or highest and or lowest value that that you can hold in an integer, whether it's negative 2 billion or positive 2 billion. So yeah, in most scenarios that's going to work for you, but if you're going to be working with a bigger number than that, we'll be going into the next one that you may use in the future. We're going to just set this to equal to 2. So we have an integer that is equal to the number 2. The next one that we're going to go into, much like an integer, is a long. So a long is a big number. So an integer is a 32-bit variable type. It only can hold I think it's a 32-bit integer type, so it can only hold 2 billion. Up to the number 2 billion, right? And a long is a 64-bit variable type, and it can hold up to like really big number. Probably, I'm not even sure what the highest number that a long can hold, but it will probably satisfy your needs. But if you're working with something longer than that, you could use like a long, which is an even longer long. But this can hold, well, this can hold over 2 billion, so we're going to put, 4 billion. So, there we go. So we have 4 billion here, and this would work in a long. We're going to name it big number. Just like that, big number. I should also go over naming your variables. So you're probably going to want to name them something that is meaningful, that you can remember, that you know what it is. And this is also where Camel Casing comes in, because when you're naming your variables, you cannot put a space between them. You cannot use a number in that. Well, you could use a number, but at the beginning you can't use a number. Just no numbers. Camel Casing makes it very simple to see the difference between that. These are two different words. I don't think you could put in like, you can't put in like, symbols or anything like that. Just letters, and that's it. So, and I would suggest using Camel Casing like this. So yeah, the next variable type that you will probably be using quite a bit is a float. Floats are decimal, so we're gonna put number, and a float can hold is again a 32-bit variable type that is able to hold decimals. You may more often use what is known as a double, which is a 64-bit one, which can hold much longer decimals. Note that these are not completely accurate, and if you are simulating money, you are not going to want to use these variable types because they are not completely accurate. So, and it's actually if you didn't know, it is actually illegal for computer systems at stores and stuff like that to use floating point variable types, simply because that they are not accurate entirely. So they have to use integers to exchange money and stuff like that. Just a little fun fact of the day. So yeah, these can hold floating point numbers, which are decimals, and for a float you need to put an F afterward in C#, so we put 0.23F to signify that it is a float. The next variable type that you will probably be using quite a bit is a double. A double is a big, we'll just put big decimal. Actually, we'll just put decimal. We'll just put decimal. So actually we can't put that because that's another variable type. Number number decimal, as I spelled decimal wrong. And this is probably going to be what we're going to more commonly use for decimals, is what is known as a double. And a double can hold a bigger value than a float can, so longer decimals than a float can. And honestly, it is more commonly used than floats, but in game development, it is incredibly common to use floats because they are smaller and more memory efficient. Also, just a note, the bit sizes that I was talking about before are how much space these things take up in memory. So that's a 32-bit signed. Apparently, yeah, this is a 32-bit signed integer. So, and these things take up 32 bits in memory. So, depending on how big of a number you're needing to store, that determines how big these things are in memory. So, that's why floats are more commonly used in game development, because we are trying to not take up that much memory. We need to keep it simple, and we need to not take up exorbitant. If I said that right, I probably didn't. Essentially, we do not want to take a lot of memory up. We want to be as efficient as possible and as processor efficient as possible. We don't want to hog resources. So, but a float is smaller than a double, and a double is bigger than a float. Just remember that, and you need to remember that you always need to use these little F's at the end. The next thing that we're gonna go over is a char, which is a character. We're gonna name this a character, and char simply can hold a character, a single character, not multiple like a string. It's just a single character, and these are just simply just a single letter. So it can also be a number too. So if you wanted to make this the number 9, you totally can. But it's not the same as this. These are not the same. These are completely different things. If you put in a char at 9 and try to convert it to an integer, or try to use it as an integer to do math, it's not going to work. You need to use an integer for that. You can convert it to an integer, but like I said, this is a character. Any one character out of the keyboard, and that's what that is. So yeah. The next thing that we'll be going over is a string, which is what we used in the last video, or the last 2 videos. No, in the last video. And a string is a string of characters. So string of characters. And this can equal, hello world. And it can hold any sentence, word, a 5-paragraph essay. It can hold a string of characters. So that's what a string is. I think I've went over all the basic variable types that you will need to know. These are what you're going to be using a lot, actually. And you can utilize them in many different ways. So, yeah. I think that's it for this video. So these are all the basic variable types, and in the next video we'll be manipulating one of these variable types. We'll be using an integer to make a very basic calculator. So yeah, we'll be manipulating an int and storing stuff in it and doing stuff with it. So yeah, if you like the video, leave a like, comment if you have anything to say or any questions. And subscribe if you want to learn more C#. And I'll see you guys in the next video.